Well, hello everyone. So we've returned to the Guild of Inquiry to have an interesting discussion, this time on an interesting subject, hills to die on, pertaining to, I guess, interpersonal conflicts. We could contextualize or, I guess, specify as though, those associated with Facebook or other social media, but it could be personal relationships as well. I've got Yusra here. I don't think you've been on for a while.
Yes, I think this could be my second time on this channel. Hi everyone, my name is Yusra. I was a major in philosophy and I like having philosophical discussions.
And James, would you like to introduce yourself?
So my name is James Apperson. I have a blog, a YouTube channel, and a Facebook. I'm usually on YouTube these days. And I think my Facebook friends are glad for the reprieve because I'm sure they got tired of hearing from me because I would post way too often. I have deep interests in philosophy, but within a limited context. I have deep interest in religion, but only as it affects our lives today. I'm not super interested in it beyond that context. I was raised in a religious conservative household. I am now an atheist, it's probably the easiest word to ascribe to that. And I deconverted about 10 years ago. So that's me.
I see, James. And Wes, you are our producer, although this is news to me. I didn't know we had a producer. So thank you for helping us on this endeavor.
I went to producer Wes, so most people on this channel would know who I am anyway, but I also am interested in religion, philosophy, psychology, and which I know we all four have similar interest in that. So let's get started, I guess.
James, tell me a particular topic that's been spicy for you, that's usually resulted in some sort of interpersonal conflict, and some of your positions, because I gather that from your proposal of the aforementioned topic that you have much to discuss on this matter.
It's a common topic that we discuss in the community that I'm involved in with YouTube. There's a lot of people in different stages of their deconversion from religion, most of it from Christianity. And there's a few people amongst us that are actually still kind of in that domain, but in maybe non-traditional ways. And especially as we approach the holidays, there's a lot more discussion about how tolerant to be of the religions that they've escaped from. So, they're going to be looking at holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas. They're going to go there, be amongst family. There's going to be a lot of people talking about, God and Jesus and everything else. And some of those families are a little bit more aggressive about that than others. And so we talk a lot about, should individuals attend? If they do, is there anything that they should speak up about before, during, or after? Or should they just play nice and pretend? Because a lot of times these people's families think that they're still believers. And in some cases they don't, right? But then there's still the issue of where do you draw the line? Because those people have every right to want to have a religious theme to their holiday events. That's what they're used to, and that's what it means to them. But at the same time, people that are trying to escape that whole domain and feel triggered or bothered in some way by it also have a right to not have to subject themselves to a special amount of that. And at the same time, they're like, but I don't want to miss out on the connection, right? Because already they feel like they've got a lesser connection with family than they had before. Either because the family knows that they've lost their faith, or because the family doesn't know, but they're keeping their distance to kind of not be obvious about it, right? Because they don't want to have to pretend to believe every time they're around family. And so this is one of the issues that come up. It's but it also comes up in other contexts too, right? Because there's a lot of debates and discussions on YouTube and on other social media platforms. And some of us are very militant. They look for opportunities to have heated contests because they want people that are in religions to know how wrong they are. And others of us are on the far other end of that spectrum where we're just kind of live and let live. And then I think the majority of us are somewhere in the middle of that spectrum, leaning one way or the other. I don't think most of us represent the far end of either side of that. So, but it comes up a lot. Where do you draw the line? How many of your personal resources do you devote to this? How many estranged relationships do you risk to take a stand? Where do you take that stand? How aggressively should you take that stand? When and where and how should you take that stand? So these are common points of discussion amongst us. And I thought this would be a great discussion for us to have tonight, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people in the audience that in some way can relate to these uncertainties or these quandaries.
And could we perhaps be so bold as to generalize or extrapolate to other applicable instances, such as people's perspectives on climate change or vaccination or the utility of masks or dangers associated with COVID-19, its contraction, its dissemination, etc. Things of that sort as well.
Absolutely. I think those are just as important to discuss, because it's about the connections that we have with our community and with our society, our nation, our neighbors, our friends, our family, our coworkers, where we are, how we identify ourselves in the scheme of things, and what risks we can afford to take in which settings to kind of make our views known, and where and when maybe we shouldn't. So these are still the same kinds of issues with the same kinds of consequences. So absolutely, it's fair to discuss the entire spectrum of that, especially right now with America being as polarized. And I realize some viewers might not be in America, but they probably know just how polarized we are right now and how troubled everyone is about that.
Yes, I think it's very relevant, especially with what's been happening politically. One topic that comes to mind is abortion. It's kind of, not discussed, is it appropriate to bring up these topics in family settings, or maybe, workplace? What lines do we draw? What do we talk about, or what don't we talk about? And when it comes to in our day-to-day life, what settings are appropriate? These discussions are appropriate to bring up is definitely something that we should be talking about.
Mayhaps we could also further concretize and specify this to, because there's so much to discuss here, but maybe a discussion of like these behaviors phenomenologically as they occur, and maybe what things could be underlying contributors to their instantiation, and by implication, how then perhaps we could conjecture about mitigating them, dealing with them, thinking through them. I mean, obviously, we have an hour to 45 minutes. We can't have a truly substantial conversation, but we can perhaps find some nebulous footholds to stand on, right? So I guess what I mean by that is, for instance, do you think that an illusion of knowledge is often, in some non-trivial subset of cases, predictive of a tendency to be combative, to be domineering, or to be disagreeable in one's engagements? The illusion that one has competence in something, and the idea that they are in a position to educate others.
No, I certainly think so. Not just in terms of the illusion of knowledge about the facts of a matter, but also in terms of the illusion of knowledge about the consequences of a matter. So if they think, for example, that climate change isn't happening, for example, or that we're not contributing to it, and that's the data set that they think that they're drawing from. And then beyond that, they actually believe that the idea that climate change is real is somehow subversive or somehow part of a plot to take away their rights or undermine society in some way. Then they have this twofold set of illusions, not just incorrect data, which in and of itself, I think isn't the bigger problem, but they've got this illusion about consequences for what they think is people not being on the same page as them about the data. And so they might feel like they've really got to be loud and outspoken about this. They've really got to push back on global climate change as a thing, because they think perhaps that there's going to be consequences to the what they think is our illusion, right? They think we're wrong, or at least I don't know what side of that you're on, but for me, I'm on the side that climate change is
a very real phenomenon.
Yeah, it's a very real phenomenon, and we are significantly contributing to it.
Yeah,
and it's for me, it's difficult to get people like that to listen, but I sometimes try to sidestep the issue, because what we're really talking about is whether or not we should make certain changes to the way that we live in order to slow down the process. And so a lot of times these people don't have a pronounced view about the other impacts of pollution. They know pollution's a thing, right? and they know that everybody wants clean air and clean water, and that there are health consequences to not having clean air and clean water. So then usually with that kind of a thing, I'll switch the topic to, okay, let's shelf it for a moment, because what we're underneath of it all, we're talking about whether or not we should make certain society-wide changes or global changes to the way that we manufacture and the way that we live. And then I'll just bring out some other data sets that they haven't been exposed to about lung disease and infant mortality rates and things like that, and talk about how many people are suffering and dying every year just because of the changes we haven't yet made. Even if global climate change isn't happening, my argument would then still be, but we should still be making those changes anyways. So if global climate change really is happening, and we're right about that, and the majority of scientists are right about that, then it's a good thing we're going to make the changes. And if global climate change isn't a thing, or we're not really contributing to it just for the sake of argument, look at these other reasons for why we probably should be making those changes. So we'll kind of go around the issue to get them toward that, to that end goal where we arrive on the same page about what we should do, because it's very difficult a lot of times when someone is kind of like talking to flat earthers a lot of times when we talk to people who think that global climate change is a hoax, because once they get sold on this larger structure of ideas, it's a big tangled mess, and it takes just so much work to unravel it.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess with topics such as those, I think one of the biggest problems is that a lot of topics like climate change and abortion and things like that have been politicized. So people kind of have like this us versus them mentality, and if they feel like a part of their identity is being challenged when you challenge them on that idea, because they have learned to associate a certain idea with a political stance. So I think it's very, even when you go out of your way, like you were saying, James, to explain certain points to them, like rational, logical points concerning climate change, I find that in some cases it's really frustrating to have a productive debate with somebody, especially if they've wrapped up their identity with a certain stance on an issue that they've politicized. So yeah, that's what I want to say about that.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And that's a big. Go ahead.
I would conjecture that another seemingly relevant parameter that I've observed is that it's not merely the data points that people seem to synthesize, but an illusion of competence and specificity in thinking patterns, an illusion of coherence in thinking that often can further predispose individuals to thinking that they're not only informed, but that they're intelligent enough to actually engage meaningfully with the content. And I found that that's another issue, that people are very good often at not only finding what they're looking for, but at agreeing with themselves. And their understanding of logic is usually as deep as syllogisms that they've looked up online and simple rules of thumb, like circular reasoning, etc., which just belies an understanding of deeper foundational logic. It's difficult in that, for instance, we're discussing climate change, but how many people do you think know how much argon, what percentage trace amounts of argon actually comprise Earth's atmosphere on average? You guys know?
Oh, I don't remember high school for that. That's a small percent, like what, 3% maybe?
Far, far less. It's actually less than 0.101%. But argon actually turns out to have a chemical relevancy in the problem. It's that, and for example, how many people have heard of the permafrost problem associated with climate change, whereby you have repository. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, I do know of that problem a little bit from Amanda. And yeah, when the permafrost comes up, it's going to have a lot more carbon dioxide. Is that right?
Methane.
Or methane. Okay, methane.
But what I'm getting at
will increase the rate of change, right?
Well, this is where it's complicated.
Almost.
It's not even as simple as more methane necessarily means more ozone destruction per se, because it's a logarithmic function. And the more you release, you actually get diminishing returns in the chemical reactions that ensue to destroy the ozone layers. And so it's not as simple as even a linear relationship of chemical reactivity. What I'm trying to say is this nuance and complexity can create the illusion of contention in the field for people that are non-experts and who don't understand how precise and how many steps there are between two presuppositions. They don't lend themselves to narrative story structures or simple A to B lines of thinking. And that in turn can create, from the outside looking into the community, the illusion of contention that doesn't exist among scientists.
I think
Right,
it's 97% of climatologists or scientists agree of climate change being a huge problem. And apparently people will focus on the 3%.
Well, what I mean to say is that the way in which they agree is so complex in the language, and that it's not the kind of agree that lends itself to political representation. It's like saying that observers in different reference frames agree on emergent events. That's just not something a physicist would necessarily agree to. It depends on what kind of accelerated reference frames we're talking about. What are the gravity fields, et cetera. And so it's, what I'm trying to say is that inability to simplify to a we all agree, not because, is more so done, I think, for the sake of consumption for the public. But this leads me to my next point, which is also, ironically, that very often the publicity associated with such movements and such problems is seldom actually solved on a massive scale. What I mean by that is, if you look at a lot of engineering feats and a lot of innovations that have occurred, the greatest ones usually don't require the direct participation of the individuals they benefit, right? You don't need to understand electrodynamics to turn on a light bulb. You don't need to know neuroanatomy to get your brain operated on by a neurosurgeon, et cetera. So it's a Pareto distribution in impact and in reach as far as participation in solving these problems usually is concerned. So in other words, it's not even emphatically clear that for a lot of these problems, what I mean to say is it may even be a misconception to assume that solving these problems is a function of awareness. And so the whole idea of spreading the word may be superfluous in some cases, even those in which it would seem obvious, like carbon emission. You would think carbon emission is a huge thing, but if you think about wealth being Pareto distributed, right, then you realize that investors with a large share of wealth and where they put their money based on what innovations they choose actually can have a huge impact over time as to what technologies actually do emerge. And so what I'm trying to say is that sometimes even solutions of the sort like we need to clean up the oceans actually involve a very small percentage of individuals collaborating. Like huge oil spills are not, they're large collaborations, but in the scale of the populations they affect of humans, it's a very small percentage of humans that actually directly participate in the reconciliation. Of course, you can argue economics, and you could say that there are externalities that have implicit effects that then give. So what I'm not saying is that making things publicly aware is not a good idea, right? I'm merely observing that sometimes that may have no relationship whatsoever to the development of solutions and their execution. But seldom is that considered in the points posited. Sometimes, for example, with atheism, if you're worried about organized religious structures for moral reasons or something, and you have a desire to educate a population, if you study systems of differential equations pertaining to like the dissemination of information from an epidemiological or pseudo-virological model, in which there's a transmission interval, there's an incubation period, and you can watch. Of course, it's not quite one-to-one, and the systems of differential equations differ, but these imply a growth and decay rate, and this implies, of course, just like with isolating individuals for transmission, that sometimes the best ways to kill ideas, as has been shown throughout history, is just to stop talking about them, not to prevent discussion about them, but rather to minimize through imposition of opportunity costs how much they're discussed with other things, and over time, and that's why languages change. And so you have again this instance of like we want to spread awareness. But then mathematically, on the entropic tide in which we stand macroscopically, it's not even clear that that's the best actual way to dismantle organized religious structures.
So people might not be accomplishing what they intend to accomplish, even if they do well in debates and discussions, whether it's on a large scale or just with individual people.
Because you're still instantiating in the language and in the minds of individuals, reinforcing over time. And this is the irony, is that the more widespread your message becomes, right, the more that discussion can happen for individuals watching that for or against either side. And so this is often why if we study, Joshua was in this conversation, I wish he was, anthropologically or archaeologically, many languages, they just dissipate into the ether. Even if you look within one language, like, American English, it's like over time, the terms we use, like the term flapper, we just don't use flapper anymore. And the common social convention associated with the utility of that word is kind of dissipated in a way that it's just not, and so it's ironic. And yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head.
I think I understand what you're saying. So you're saying that by having those sorts of discussions, we are in a sense popularizing it, or allowing it to thrive in the public arena.
We're increasing the probability of retention in the memories of the individuals to whom. So it's ironic in that, again, that's not to say we shouldn't have these discussions. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just observing that sometimes there are counterintuitive implications associated with discussions. And so how does this relate to what hills to die upon? Because sometimes the moral positions we take are often tied to the, as you said earlier, James, the assumptions we have in relation to what we do. And what I mean by that is, say, spreading awareness, right? Some people would say we have a moral obligation of some sort, not necessarily about religiosity, but some topic, right? Vaccination, etc. So too with vaccines. If you actually study them, it's not necessary that everybody actually be vaccinated for them to eradicate a virus. You just need a sufficiently large subset of the population to do so.
Right.
So that's not. So I guess what I'm saying is it's often not just. But I mean, this is kind of obvious, right? It's very seldom the case that for most instantiated policies, you want everybody to do it. There's a diminishing marginal benefit that's logarithmic, and exponential rise in marginal cost.
Right. So diminishing returns and increasing costs
usually work out at some point where it's not worth it. And that's counterintuitive where you have unpopular implications, like, say, with healthcare, where if you universalize it, it will not be as mathematically efficient as if you actually charge for it, which is counterintuitive. And that seems to be the way that the differential equations associated with macro and microeconomics work out. It's if you universalize it through some, government structure, you can do that, but then you're compromising the potential efficiency of a sufficiently pseudo-free market. So but this actually makes a good point, is if you're discussing, say, politics and there's an implication that's economical, what I've found is very few individuals who are willing to discuss economics have studied differential equations based economics. And so their intuitions about how things work versus people who've spent decades doing deep mathematical analysis of things of this sort are often, they're in juxtaposition in such a way that it makes a discourse difficult and it become emotionally charged.
Right. No, absolutely. So, and I think too that the more we talk about things on a wide scale, the more useful those discussions or debates become to politicians who seek to politicize and weaponize the issues. So, they, by making it a hot button issue, they're like, now we can use this to polarize our base with an us versus them polemic. And then we could, if we make it less useful for that purpose, they might quit doing it so much. And then we can go behind them, to get the word out in different ways, like through educational systems and healthcare systems and stuff to affect changes without bringing it to the political arena where it'll get weaponized. So we can actually, yeah.
I mean, I agree with what you said, James. And I do think it is a problem that a lot of people have this idea that they are experts on a topic, which is, the more you learn about the complexity of certain topics, you realize that it's not something that you can just have a stance on without really delving into it. And I think a lot of people, when they discuss hot topic issues, they go into it thinking that they are, they just Google something and they just read a bunch of articles online and they think that they have, that they've arrived at their stance in a very informed way. When in reality, the more you learn about it, the more you learn that you don't know about it.
Yeah.
So you don't even know what stones there are to even stand upon. Yeah, not to say that you can't have a position on something. It's just that the complexity of a topic, such as abortion, for example, a lot of questions that underlie that debate are what does it mean to be a human? At what stage is a fetus considered a human? And that's a scientific question that maybe experts would be.
I would say the form of that question though is already problematic because it is by definition a human fetus.
Yeah, it
right.
is by
definition. You mean a person?
Yeah, I kind of worded that.
Or life, or
right.
I got what you mean.
Personhood, I suppose you could say, and what rights does personhood entail, and that kind of thing. So there's so many different layers to these kind of topics that just simplifying them, like when people go into a discussion, they will probably attach themselves to 1 or 2 points, when really there's so much gray. And there's a lot of unexplored areas, and it's like I've sensed there's an unwillingness to explore that gray area, because if you show yourself as willing to explore that area, it's almost as if you've lost the debate or something. So it's important to go into like these debates with an open mind, and it really takes a certain kind of person when you're discussing these kind of debates to really be willing to explore those gray areas without, oh, you're wrong and I'm right, or vice versa. So it's not about being wrong or right. It's about how do we actually have a meaningful discussion about this topic without it being a competition type thing. So
right, and with some people you just can't. Like they're so invested, their identity is so invested, their emotions are so invested, their narrative is so cemented in place, and a lot of times they lack the intellectual and emotional tools to be able to sort through it in a responsible and progressive way.
Right.
And if they lack the investment or even the courage to question their own paradigm, if they're so invested that they can't budge from it, then it doesn't really matter like how good you are at having the discussion or how much time you spend trying to disarm them. It just won't matter. They won't budge. And so that's one of the things like we have to, when it comes to controversial issues that could cause somebody to feel like we're the enemy, like we're a bad person or we're dangerous or something, I think we have to like be mindful, like, can we risk that? Do we want to risk that? What are the costs and benefits for risking it versus not? Because a lot of times there's no certain answer because we're not sure how somebody will respond, how a friend will respond or a family member will respond, and we don't want to risk it. And I always tell people that I just don't know what to tell them about what they should do. But I'm different. Like I lost all my extended family when I deconverted. I don't have any of them anymore. So for me, it's a simple matter. Like I can be as loud as I want on Facebook, YouTube, anywhere else, no consequence. There's none. But if I had close people that were very religious, man, I'd know that I'd have to be really careful about how to address these issues. And it's unfortunate because there's certain skill sets that the public education system could, and parents really could be imparting to their children that they're not imparting to their children. Not just in terms of like language communication skills, but emotional regulation skills and just discussion skills, and even just basic concepts. Like I found that one of the biggest points of growth that I went through after my deconversion was I learned the skill of being able to unhook my sense of identity, my ego, and my worth from a narrative. So no matter what narrative I hold to, it doesn't define who I am as a person. It's my core values that define me as a person. So my entire narrative could change. Somebody could convince me of a religion, for example, and there's no threat to me about that because my ego is not being wagered, right? Like it's not tied to the narrative of what I think is real and what I think is not real. And a big problem with a lot of religious people is because they've been specifically cultivated in such a way, like in terms of their psychology, the way that they think, to attach their ego to these issues. Like the religion defines their worth, their worthiness to even exist in the world, and whether or not they're a good or a bad person. And so they feel like when you're attacking the narrative, you're attacking them because they haven't separated themselves from the narrative. And until somebody can separate themselves in that way, like I don't think there's a whole lot of room for progress except for maybe being able to get them to respect your journey. That's probably as much as you can get them to do, maybe.
This is another oddity because I found, just particularly in my, as I said, I'm working at the college I currently teach math and physics at, to do like an integration of machine learning, cognitive neuroscience, and evolutionary psychology to optimize learning outcomes. And in this endeavor, I've been talking to a repository of professors and learning a lot about the relevant literature. And what I found is that our attempts to explain and often make material inferences between phenotypic expressions and their origins are often so vacuous, and whenever they're often narrative, like what I mean is something as simple as like personhood. I don't know what that is. If thinking takes time, then we don't really experience the present. But moreover, thoughts are not localized in a way that there's even necessarily one occurring. If definable, because the direction that thinking as a science is really going is into the geometry of consciousness. It's emerged in theoretical physics, which I've mentioned previously. It's the idea that if you have instantiations of emergent integrated information processing, then this will require certain shapes to the various, the electromagnetic fields, the gravity fields that will inevitably give a shape to space-time. So thinking is in a way that information is curled on itself. It's an emergent relation. But the implication is that it doesn't exist on a certain scale or in certain reference frames. And so the very idea that I had just one thought from a relativistic perspective, meaning from special or general relativity, could be called into question if and when you change reference frames to see a slightly different ordering of those neurons or neurons firing, so that you can even disagree as to which thought the I that was supposed to have that thought even had. So what I'm saying is I don't even know if ontologically there is a single I, which isn't to say that ontology could be an emergent phenomenon, but it's not at the quantum scale. It's not fundamental. It's not turtles all the way down. And so
you just took it to a whole nother level.
Question. Back on topic. What I'm trying to say to relate that to when I interact with people and try to persuade them or try to ascribe reasons for which they've disagreed, I don't even know if the surface level. Sometimes the surface level qualitative assessments of this person had this reaction because of this upbringing or whatever, maybe that has traction. But sometimes I have found that those inferences can be so far out left field from what the science reveals may actually be going on that it's hard to square the two sometimes.
I have a question of just, is there certain kinds of things that maybe we should be talking about and not other things? And if you have any topic ideas of, should we not talk about religion, but do talk about politics or
right. So to answer your question, Wes,
or ethics?
I think it really depends on the situation you find yourself in. For example, the kind of discussions that you're going to have with your family might not necessarily be the same that you have in your workplace, because there could be certain consequences that might not be ethical to yourself. For example, even if you find yourself like in say very unique situations where, like, say that you're in a very conservative country, like you traveled outside of the United States, your life might be in danger if you want to have a discussion about atheism, which is a thing, in some countries. You can't just openly go around having those kind of discussions without very real threats to your life. So
you're telling me that if I went and hit on the women in Saudi Arabia, I'd get in trouble?
Yes, I
should stop doing that.
Most definitely.
Oh,
definitely considering but we're very lucky in that
what's my favorite word in Islam? Or Arabic, because Islam is not the language. Arabic.
I don't know.
Tunisia, Arabi Tunsi.
I'm not really an expert in that.
Haram.
Yeah. Well, I'm an atheist, and I come from a very conservative Islamic background. So it really
actually it can be dangerous, like Christopher talking about other women in front of his partner. That could be really dangerous.
That could be.
She understands that I'm extremely faithful, and I might be a bit of a teaser. I might have a depraved sense of humor, but
Yeah, but joking aside, I think it really depends on the context. I don't think it's healthy to, for example, we're kind of we live in a very a relatively secular society compared to many others. So I think having those discussions, for example, like let's use atheism as an example. I have been open about my atheistic, stance with my family members. It doesn't come up in every discussion, but I'm relatively open about, if somebody asks me that question. I don't necessarily bring it up every single time, because I don't see the point in that. But I do think that to kind of keep it a secret could be also ethically harmful to oneself, because not being true to yourself or not being able to vocalize your personal belief is kind of something that we all would suffer from if everybody had to. That's not the kind of society we want to live in. But of course, one has to weigh and measure like their personal situation and the risk of personal danger, that kind of stuff. So,
and risk of unhealthy relationships. We talk about relationships when you get in boundaries and things.
Yeah. So I think it's definitely also important to understand why somebody has come to their point of view as well. And like in the context of family discussions, I believe that it is important to be true to yourself and to speak up, as long as you're not facing dire consequences. Some people, for example, are tied up financially to their family members, and they might face very real consequences if they were to be vocal about their personal beliefs. So that's also something to take into consideration. But I think if you are a functioning adult and you have the freedom to do that, then I think it is important to have those kinds of discussions. Now, how do you have those discussions? That's a whole different arena. So I'll leave it at that. How do you go about having those discussions if you are able to? And which discussions in particular are worth having? And that's the whole point of our conversation, right? So I'll leave it open.
Maybe we can ask this question: has anyone herein blocked someone on Facebook over something petty or a disagreement? And if so, for what reason?
I don't think that I have. I get blocked fairly often. I don't think I block anybody for petty stuff. Like I just don't. So
then
got one person that I blocked, and that was because he agreed with the Charles Murray's book. Like anybody knows of it. It was somewhat racist, I think, that was comparing blacks and whites of different areas unfairly. And I thought I proved it to him enough that he should question it or something. He wouldn't question it, and I finally had enough of it. And I do regret that one. The others were just kind of trolls.
So do we block people who we don't believe capable of making changes to their perspective?
That's something I kind of regret with him, and he recently added me back. The others were trolls and scammers that don't matter, but with him, I did find it was hard to do it in the first place, and then I did regret it because he is an intelligent guy and able to have changed his mind, or we could have walked away from the argument.
Because what I mean to motivate by this question is I observe that this tendency for individuals to become heated and flushed seems to actually be predominantly species typical, and that implies that it's evolutionarily rooted in a set of adaptations that together come together to comprise that individual expression. The issue at hand is we're 40 minutes in, and if I don't have time to explain evolutionary psychology and cognitive neuroscience to really substantiate that claim adequately, we'd need probably an hour just trying to go over that. You and I have discussed this in the past, Wes. Because on its face, it sounds, unfortunately, especially in the current political climate, saying such things sounds reductionist, which it's not. It sounds potentially, I don't know. In any case, what I'm trying to get at is it seems to me that then looking at those implications, that trying to subvert that or overcome it may be a matter of understanding what genomic and environmentally specific factors may predispose a person to those instances of phenotypic expression. But I don't know if it's this. In other words, the very idea that it's simply a matter of I'll explain it to them, then they'll get it, or they didn't understand, or they're just a prick. It may be that those explanations are more narrative than they are actually able to give traction and explanatory and predictive power to these phenomena if and when they arise. Because it's kind of odd, but
since we only have 5 minutes left, can we maybe go around and just say something that we would say for us would be a hill? Like, I think I could start just saying slavery or racism, bigotry.
Reasons for which we would block someone if they agreed to that? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. Or you would either speak up almost no matter what and fight them, not necessarily fist to fist, but I mean,
because like I said,
or block them.
If one person or a handful of people believe in slavery, but the vast majority of people, and that's not to say I think it's justifiable. What I'm pointing out is independent of their deluded belief. If they have no ability to materialize its practice, what does it matter that they have deluded beliefs? It's like some people believe the world is flat, but they're not numerous enough in number or in influence to actually affect NASA, to affect policy change. So I guess it's a question of like, what is it going to matter if I have, because I've met people who believe the world is flat, and knowing the physics I do, two of them at the end of discussing the calculus after about a week or so, I don't know if they understood all of it, but they agreed that it was not flat. But one of them I could not persuade, and it's just like, what? Yes, I guess it's like on one hand you can make the difference on the level of an individual, right? And at the end of the day, that's the scope of our direct potential influence. We can have implicit externalities on larger scales, but moreover, in
a debate, I often find that I'm not trying to convince them, I'm trying to convince the audience.
I don't really know is my response, which isn't to say that there isn't merit to what you're saying, but rather I'm not sure, fundamentally.
So I will just quickly say that I've never actually blocked somebody because of their beliefs. I've mostly had philosophical discussions within the context of academia, where you're free to open and criticize people with their points of view. It was encouraged. But I will say that it is important to separate the person from the ideology. People can be easily misguided. As a species as a whole, we are very prone to irrationality. But I would say that I would not closely associate with somebody who has dangerous beliefs. I think it's healthier to, not to say that I'm perfect with this, but I think it's probably healthier to have boundaries with people of that sort.
Boundaries is what I was hoping to bring up earlier.
Because I'm not even sure if I block someone, if the real reason is because they disagree with me, or if I find the idea repugnant, it may be down, like I said, to subroutines, and I mean that like metaphorically, not directly analogously, because that's not analogous to human anatomy and neurology, but that basically adaptations that along with the environment, not themselves alone, were precursory towards that phenotypic expression of my blocking them. Like why? Because then you have the weird question of why do I feel the impulse to do that? Why do I feel even the impulse to block them in the first place? And if you notice, the level of I find it disgusting doesn't necessarily adequately philosophically answer that. It observes the disgust, because it's morally wrong. But then why does that invoke in me the response mechanism it does? I don't know. I don't even know if I were to block someone why I really would.
So James, I think we didn't get his input.
We can go over time a little bit.
Yeah.
James.
All right, so I'll just say this for anybody that's wrestling with this issue about whether or not you can afford to talk to friends and family about this. I would probe their narrative. Like, if they demonize people who think a certain way, then you probably can't and would not accomplish anything to reveal that you think the way that they demonize. If there's things that they're not hardcore about, those probably will determine what you can afford to talk to them about and what you can't. But in the meantime, I tell people, I'm like, look, the biggest risk for a lot of people when they come to those kinds of decisions is that they're going to lose their existing support structure in their life, their social support, their familiar support. So what I tell people is spend a lot of time building that up for yourself, because there's an awful lot of people out there who won't demonize you, who won't judge you, who won't cut ties with you for thinking the ways that you think. If you can build up a good enough support structure in your life where you've got that, what you need, then it becomes less risky and less dangerous to have more important discussions with the people that just might cut ties with you if they find out certain things. And if you can't take that risk, don't take the risk. Just keep your distance and be real careful about the situations you put yourself in with those people, so that you can maintain those, associations from a distance. I think of it as the social solar system. There are some bodies that if you get too close to them, you get burned, and if you get too far away from them, your relationship grows too cold. So it's about finding that proper balance. How close, how connected with that person can you afford to be without hurting yourself in some way? And that's going to be up to them at where their boundaries are at. And if there's certain narratives that they simply can't humor, then they just can't. That's their limit. It's not yours, and you just have to work with them in context.
I find an important thing you kind of talked about was boundaries. I must say that we all need boundaries against toxicity and some common sense too, and as well as some soft approaches to things. Not a hard arguing, but a soft side to let's discuss this rationally and leave our identity behind when we're talking about ideas. That's kind of my final thought. I want to try to get out my final thought.
Appreciate that.
Final thought, and then we'll try to end it.
Thanks, Wes. Appreciate that.
Very insightful, guys.
It's been a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to future discussions. I think next week we're going to talk about the female orgasm. Is that right?
I think so. I've got 2 women that have agreed to come on.
You want to come on for that one?
Could you come on?
Sure.
We've got 3.
I'm not an expert by any means on that topic.
Christopher said he was.
You are in some ways.
Well, anyways, I appreciate this discussion. It's been very insightful, and it was nice meeting you, James.
It was nice meeting you guys too. I like the way that he tries to push your buttons just to get a reaction.
It's been a problem whenever I meet people in public. Sometimes I'll just do stuff that's like, what is he doing? And she'll be like, oh no.
I think I'm pretty desensitized at this point, but I'm surprised we work pretty well on the same. We're on the same camera because we are in such close proximity. But I look forward to any future discussions. I will try my best to participate more because I think that's an area that I need to work on more, is being a part of these kind of discussions more.
Awesome. It was really great to have you guys here.
Thanks, James.
Thanks, guys. See you soon.
Yep.